sins are the same in their consequence, which is it separates you from God.
There is a sentient enemy, right? The demons and the fallen angels. And then there's a non-sentient enemy.
The way that I like to describe sin is as a spiritual sickness.
Why doesn't he kill Satan, right? Why doesn't he just remove him?
That hell is a choice.
Down said, oh yeah, casualties, certain things are gonna happen. That's not, no. We shouldn't have to settle for that.
Mindset of Christ.
I'm Abel, and today we're filming the third episode of the Mindset of Christ podcast. I know it's been a while, but we have a guest today. His name is Dervin. He's going to introduce himself. A little bit of background between me and Dervin. Dervin was the one that had a conversation with me about Christ. I asked him questions because I had curiosity towards it. And we've known each other for quite some time now. We're very good friends, and I give it to Dervin.
Yeah, about 4-ish years ago, Abel had came to me. We were still in high school, and he was like, I have some questions about Christianity. We sat down at a park in front of my local church, and we talked about it. Me personally, I've fully realized my faith and embedded myself into it since like 2020, during COVID. So about 6-ish years I've been Christian. But I was raised Catholic throughout my entire life, and that's how I see myself. So, yeah.
Yeah, and today I want to talk about the evil in the world. I think that a big part of Christianity and the biblical narrative is that there is good and that there is evil. Ultimately, what we fight in this world is sin. The Bible identifies an enemy. And so just to get this podcast started, I want to jump straight into it and ask you, Dervin, who is the enemy? What do they want?
Well, in short, the enemy is Satan. Anything that draws you away from God. And that doesn't just happen through base sin, which is lying, gluttony, lust, but it could also seep into you in different ways. Recently we had a conversation, I don't know if you remember, and you said, and I agreed with you, that when the Bible says God sees all sin as the same, it's typically possibly misunderstood as all sins hold equal weight. And we had talked about that. Maybe that's not the case, you know. For example, murder and stealing a pencil, God sees it as the same, but perhaps we've seen it differently, you know. In God's eyes, they're both bad, and they both separate you from God, as we know that sin separates you from God, because it taints you. However, some sins tend to separate you further, which is what you've told me. Mm-hmm. You know, that was your base, that was your premise, and honestly, I hadn't seen it like that, and I believe it to be true. So when we talk about evil and what the enemy is, it's sin in itself taken to the extremity. Right. Any sin separates you. You know, you can become your own enemy against God simply by sinning. The enemy is just sin indulging sin to its maximum capacity, which then the enemy uses that against you and draws you so far away from God that you're no longer considered a child. You're considered the enemy with them.
Right.
So, in short, the enemy is Satan in all of his dominions. But the reason they have power is because they disconnect themselves from God. And it's that sin is the enemy as well. So there is a sentient enemy, right? The demons and the fallen angels. And then there's a non-sentient enemy, which is sin in itself. You combine the two, you have the ultimate enemy.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way of putting it. We've already gone over this conversation so many times already because we've tried to film this, and I think something that's strange is that every time we try to film this, something went wrong.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to describe, well, you already know what I'm going to describe, but I think it's important for the people to see this perspective. I like the way that you describe who the enemy is and what sin is, and indulging in that sin separates you from God. And the way I see it is like it's a distance you put between yourself and God. There are small sins, there are big sins, but ultimately sins are the same in their consequence, which is it separates you from God.
Yeah.
You commit a small sin, it's going to separate you from God. You commit a big sin, it's going to separate you from God. The only difference is the distance that you put between you and God. There are certain sins that have harsher consequences because they're bigger sins. And so the bigger they are, the bigger that distance is. And it ultimately, I think the question that we should go back to is, what is sin? Right? Because some people might be asking, what's so important about sin? Why should I care about it, and why should I care about not doing it? And the way that I like to describe sin is as a spiritual sickness. It infects people, right? The same way you could get the flu and I could contaminate you right now. I could contaminate someone else. Sin does the exact same thing. And that's why it started with one person, or technically two people. It started with Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
And it didn't just spread to, us as individual people, but it spread to the earth. There were actual physical consequences to the earth because of sin. We were originally supposed to live with God in peace and in harmony. Originally, animals, they were not supposed to, they weren't meant to survive and eat other animals. We were all supposed to live in peace and harmony, but it was because of sin that the physical world was corrupted, and we are part of the physical world, being material beings. And so I would ask you this question. Why do you think the enemy is as powerful as they are? Why do you think God allows Satan to exist? Because some people ask, why does Satan exist? Why doesn't God just get rid of Satan? And I think that's an important question to ask, because I think if you look deeply enough into the biblical narrative and you use, your deductive reasoning, there is an answer. But I'm curious about what you think about that.
Well, that question kind of inherently begs another question, which has to do with, why do we even live this life? If the whole thing is just a big giant test, and if God is omnipotent and knows the future, knows everything that's going to happen, how or why does he test us if he knows how it's going to end? And the way I like to see it and explain it to people is, if I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, and I give a class a test, but, for some odd reason, I already know who's going to fail and who's going to pass. And let's say I skipped the test, and I said, well, I already know all of you so well to the point where I can pass who's already going to pass, and then whoever is going to fail, I can just fail you guys. Those same students would come back to me who failed and say, that's unfair. Why are you failing me? Which I didn't even get a chance to even prove myself. You didn't give me that chance. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm just trying to save time and energy. I already know you're going to fail. You're not cut out for it. Just leave the class. You got enough. That's highly unfair. And the students would have grounds to be like, hey, you didn't give me a chance. Where was my chance? Why did they get a chance, or whoever, but I wasn't given a chance? You ended it already. So in a way, at least from my understanding, a giant reason as to why all of this exists is because it kind of has to exist for us to understand the kind of people we are. You don't necessarily have grounds if you were given a proper life, you have all the information handed to you, and you still chose not to change. You still chose to reject God actively, knowing what he was about. And then you complain, God, I wasn't given a chance. Well, you can't really say that. You were given a chance. He could have just let you not be born and just put you in heaven. He could have let you not be born and put you in hell. Doesn't matter. Or purgatory, or whoever's perspective it is. He'll put you wherever, because he already knows. But then you would have grounds to be upset. And so why doesn't he kill Satan, right? Why doesn't he just remove him? I believe a huge part of that has to do with free will. That free will inherently needs to accept all probabilities. And it would be unfaithful to a certain degree if you were to run an experiment and you didn't include necessary variables, because then you're kind of restricting it. And if you're restricting it, you don't get to show people the kind of people that they are. If we were prohibited from being tempted, we're not going to know what temptations we would fall into and what, temptations we wouldn't fall into. So allowing his existence and everything else that is happening is naturally allowing free will to expand as is.
Right.
And God can't intervene every single time. Otherwise, we would just be robots. If every time you were about to sin, God intervened, is that really you being a good person? If God has to physically intervene? If he removed Satan, and all it was if the sentient enemy, right, Satan and his dominions are gone, and all that's left is just the sin, it would obviously be much easier not to sin. But that's also God meddling in our lives. And at the end of the day, we choose what we want to do. The whole premise of temptation is that you're actually not forced to do it. If you're forced to kill someone, it's not murder. They had a gun to your head. Yes, you still pulled the trigger, but it's not like you were not forced to do it. No, either you died or someone else did. No one's going up to you and stuffing ice cream down your throat, making you fat.
Right.
No one's has your whole family, I don't know, on a block of ice with nooses around their neck. Like, it's not dramatic to the point where it's like, oh, if you don't insult this person, everyone's gone.
What, stop filming?
Yeah,
It did?
I think so, yeah.
Press it again. Yeah, if it just keeps happening, just keep an eye on it and then just press record again.
Oh, yeah.
We're good. You're good.
All right.
Just keep going.
Well, no one and nothing is necessarily forcing you to act on these things. Right now, it's not like there's a sniper to the back of my head telling me, hey, lunge at the person across you and start pummeling him. That's not happening. You have to actively indulge in it.
Mm-hmm.
The same way you have to actively indulge in good. So when people are complaining or people are saying, why does Satan exist? Why can't God just erase him? Kind of like the yin and yang situation. You have both options. God needs to show you the kind of person that you are so you don't complain later on. And it could be good. You could be going to heaven. But he needs to show you that you earned it.
Yeah. And I think I love having these conversations, especially the very deep questions, the ones that are hard to answer.
Yeah.
And I want to make it known to the people, these are very hard questions. These questions, you shouldn't expect a person to have all the answers because we're not God.
Yeah.
We can only speculate. We can only think philosophically and try to come up with reasons as to why. Doesn't mean we shouldn't think. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try to figure out why. And I think something that you're touching on is very important, right? Because you're emphasizing that God gives us free will. A lot of people would be like, dude, why doesn't God just, like, from the get-go, like, why doesn't he just let us live in peace? Right? Because peace, in order to live peacefully, that requires you to be with God.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. The God that we see in the Bible, the God that is portrayed through the character of Jesus Christ, the living man God, is a God that prioritizes free will, that prioritizes freedom over anything else. As much as God loves you or me, Dervin, God prioritizes the fact that he would rather you choose him than force you to be with him. Because most of us would argue, if somebody forces us to be with them, that's not freedom, that's not love. And so it would literally be a contradiction. And I think that because free will ultimately exists, there exists the option to go against God.
Yeah.
And I said this in the first episode, there's the good will and then there's your will. Anything going against that will is evil. Meaning you have the choice to choose evil, and if you want to choose good, you ultimately choose God.
Yeah.
Right? And I think another important thing is God being just. I asked you, why does God let Satan do what he wants? Well, number one, he prioritizes free will. Satan, to a certain extent, can do what he wants. That's why he rules this world. That's why he tries to manipulate us.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there are certain lines which even Satan can't cross, right? Because God is almighty. But at the end of the day, God's justice prevails. And I think there's light in that. I think there's hope in that. In the fact that Satan is going to do what he's going to do, but ultimately we know he's going to be destroyed. He's not going to make it to the end. He's not going to replace God, which is what he wanted to do in the first place because of his pride. And so ultimately, I think something that helps me a lot is that the world that we're living in right now is Satan trying his absolute best to distract you.
Yeah.
To keep you away from the peace of God, from the joy of God, from the love of God. Because ultimately, if it were up to God and he could somehow contradict himself, let's say, he would make it so all of us would go to heaven because he loves us.
Yeah.
But God is fair. God is just. So he gives you the free choice. Number one, because you have freedom. Number two, because ultimately it's going to be fair that you decide what you want in your eternity.
Some people may not want that too.
And some people may not want
they,
that.
They don't want that.
But I think that's something that's important to emphasize, because a lot of people are afraid of hell and they think God sends you to hell. But I ultimately think God is a choice, because hell is void of God's presence.
That's another thing I want to tap into, and this may be considered a little taboo, but this is just my perspective, my understanding. I admit I have to research more on it, but I'm not entirely sure I accept this notion that if you're not with God, you go into hell, right? It says that you are separation from God, and the actual hell that everyone talks about is specifically reserved for the fallen angels, Lucifer, Satan, and all of his dominions. You know, the sentient enemy, that's for them. What's specifically repeated throughout the Bible is separation from God. Separation, separation, separation. And I think only once or twice does it mention a hell-like, hell-adjacent. It's not actually hell, you know, as where all the demons and all this evil sentient enemy goes, you're also going to if you choose not to follow God. And I think that's a huge reason as to why people don't follow. You know, I've heard a lot online, in person, people say, oh, God isn't loving, he's not all just and not all knowing, because, you know, if you steal a pencil and you forget to repent for it, you're going to hell and you're going to suffer for eternity. That's not at all what it is. It says in the Bible that you go into a place of suffering because you are separating yourself from God. And I think it's very important that we establish what that really means, because obviously with no context, no explanation, and you ignore everything else, that's going to sound bad. And yeah, that does sound unfair. It really does. I won't lie. But that's not what it is. That's not what's being said. God is always described as love, patience, and understanding, and warmth, and light, and life. So what would the opposite of that be? Death, depression, hatred, agony. So obviously, if you're excluding yourself and purposely pushing yourself away from the love, understanding, compassion, life, you're pushing yourself into the opposite direction, into death, depression, agony, starvation, confusion. Yeah, you're gonna suffer. That's kind of obvious. So when people are confused, I think it's because they have a misconception of how that works. And I think as Christians, we have to be very prominent on that, because there's a lot of movies, there's a lot of music, there's a lot of shows that show the former, the hell is this if this happens. If you steal a pencil and you don't repent, you're sinful and you're gonna go to hell. So God's not loving. There's a lot of movies, shows, and TV, you know, and music that show that. They show that. And obviously, if you're growing up watching this and there's no one else to explain to you how it actually works, you're gonna adopt that. And unfortunately, I will take the risk and even say, especially this specific generation, they get a lot of their morals from media, from other podcasters, from TV and social media. That's where they get their morals from. Especially because media affects how people act. So if everyone else is acting because the media is saying this specific thing, you yourself are going to react to that and indirectly be influenced by the morals that the media portrays, which is highly inaccurate. So this whole, You don't repent because you stole a pencil when you were 3 years old. You're dying and burning in hell because you didn't believe in God. That's not true. That's not true. I personally don't adopt that. I don't think that's as is. Now, is it vaguely similar to a different situation? Possibly. But I'm not saying, oh, outright, that is what it is. It's set in stone. Oh, it's this, it's this.
So you would mean more so the approach, right? Not
Yeah.
necessarily the destination.
The destination is not as people describe it as. This whole, you're going to die, you're going to burn, you're a vile, disgusting individual, and you deserve it for stealing a pencil when you were like 6 years old. That is not at all. First of all, the approach, yeah, that's, why would you say that? That's not how you say it. Secondly, I want to put more emphasis on what hell actually is for humans, because the imprisonment of demons and Satan and his dominions is not the same imprisonment for humans. And I think as Christians, we should emphasize that. It's the separation from God. And like I explained, obviously, if God is all of these beautiful things and you're going in the opposite direction, you're going to encounter not so beautiful things. So it's not so much as God physically putting you there, because I've noticed that's what a lot of media and a lot of people in this generation think, that he physically puts you there, like in the U.S. prison system. You mess up, and it doesn't matter if you're sorry that you messed up. It doesn't matter if you're trying to do better. We're throwing you in prison anyways. That's not what it is. What's happening is that you made a crime, you committed a crime, and the U.S. judicial system wants to put you away, right? And in Christianity, it's more like we have this justice system. You committed a crime, right? But we want to rehabilitate you, genuine rehabilitations. We want to help you. We want to help you become a better individual. We're offering all this help, love, understanding, compassion, and acceptance for you. But you are pushing back against that. Obviously, if you're pushing back against a system that's offering these lovely things, you're going to go back into the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And obviously, if we see that physically, people would understand.
Yeah.
But, we can't see that. This is a spiritual sense. So, agony and the afterlife, if you push against God, is separation from love.
Yeah.
We should emphasize that.
I think you're right. I think the one thing where I would push back simply with my own perspective is the part where you can't be absolutely certain about many things. According to the knowledge I have now, it's like you said, I could do more research on this and I could have a better understanding. The Bible describes hell as a place of gnashing of teeth, a place that smells like sulfur, a place of suffering. But it also says in the Bible that the demons, right, or people in hell within that context will experience eternal destruction. Now that can mean either, you cease to exist, or you're suffering for eternity, right? And I know Jesus does mention this specifically, and I should know what it is that he says word for word, but it doesn't pop up to me right now. But I will say this, regardless of what hell looks like, because we won't really know all of the characteristics unless we go there, which honestly
It'd be too late.
Yeah, it'd be too late at that point. Don't want to go there. It's better not to focus on that part, because the parts that we need to know are the important parts, which is what you said, right? If you're constantly pushing against that love, that peace, that kindness, that grace, then there's an ultimate rejection of that will, which is the good will. And ultimately, that's why I believe that hell is a choice. Because when we look at Jesus on the cross, he was whipped, he was beaten, he was mocked, he was insulted in front of his family members, in front of his closest friends, in front of the people that he loved the most.
Yeah.
And it says in the Bible, you couldn't even tell if Jesus was a man or a woman because they mutilated him.
That's how badly they did it.
But even that being said, Jesus felt the most pain when he was separated from God, when he said, God, why have you forsaken me? When he took all that sin into the world, my sin, your sin, everybody's sin, that was ultimate separation from God. That was the first time Jesus had been without the Father. And that was hell. He was experiencing emotional hell before he went into the physical place where the demons were, where he got the keys of hell and came and rose again, you know? And so how does hell look like? I don't know, right? Maybe it is a lake of fire. Maybe there is endless torture. Maybe there is all this stuff that happens. Maybe it is eternal destruction.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what I know it is it's a separation from God. And that is the ultimate hell that you can experience. And that is why bad things happen on earth. Because we decide to go against God's will. And another good point that you bring up, the media. Since today is the topic about the enemy, what the enemy does, what the enemy is thinking, I would like to ask you, in our media, in our TV shows, in just, you know, the cultural things that we pick up from Hollywood, or, you know, these trends going around on TikTok or Instagram, how do you think the enemy uses that? What is their main goal? And can you give specific examples of what you think in real life the enemy uses to separate us from God?
Well, in my opinion, the enemy uses what you see, hear, eat, smell, all your five senses against you. There's this thing in psychology where your brain kind of like chops up all the information you're hearing, seeing, smelling. And what's important, like it has to do with like right now, like me touching this desk, me talking, me seeing you, my environment, it registers it so that my conscious brain can know what that is. Can like, okay, this is happening, that's happening. That's why sometimes people forget things, because at some point their brain's like, this isn't really important, we have to prioritize this information. It's also the reason why your subconscious is a very powerful thing, because your senses can pick up on something. You know, you can see something, but your brain at the moment doesn't register it as something important, so it passes it off. So you're aware of it, but your attention isn't immediately put on it. This is important because what used to happen is that there's something called like subliminal messaging. It could be used for something harmless or something serious. In theaters, I'll send you the evidence. You can link it down below. They wanted to put ads for one frame in between all of these, this movie with all these frames and all this action. And what would happen is that when they tested this, they noticed that people got really hungry for McDonald's or for whatever food they were putting for that, not even a full frame, just half a frame for a split second. And people would get really hungry. And at some point, it became illegal to do this. They found it as an unethical method for advertisement, as you're subconsciously inputting into these moviegoers' minds that they want McDonald's, and it would boost the sales of the McDonald's in that area. That's unethical.
That's interesting.
Because their eyes picked up on what's happening, but they didn't know that. Otherwise, who isn't going to talk to their family and friends and record it and be like, bro, like a McDonald's ad just played for like a 5-second straight? Like, who wouldn't take a picture of that?
Right.
But no one was talking about it because they consciously were not aware that they picked up on an image of McDonald's or Burger King or whatever the fast food was for a split second. But because of the way the brain works, it told them it has nothing to do with what we're watching.
And how do you think the enemy uses that to their advantage?
They use this kind of method and all sorts of other ones that we're aware and unaware of in our daily lives. Advertisements, commercials. When you start to see certain things, right? I'm no psychologist. I could be dead wrong, and I'd be open to admitting that. But from what I do understand, right, in the courses I did take, is your brain likes to save energy and make shortcuts. So when you're constantly consuming this information of sin in movies, sin that has to do with drugs, Euphoria is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I never liked that show. It was all about exploitation and sexualization and heavy drug abuse and on teens. There were teens in the show. There were adults in real life, but they were portraying actual teens within the show. That wasn't right. That doesn't seem right. You know, I don't think that's entertainment at all. And there's a lot of other shows and media that just do the same thing. That put certain subjects next to another subject. And if you're constantly watching this, if you're constantly listening to music about sex, drugs, and all that, and you're enjoying it, you're conflating enjoyment and fun with sin. So it's almost as if you're conditioning and training yourself that fun is sin. That's why throughout every generation, I believe it becomes more secular, because it's more accessible now. It's harder to flash images in the newspaper because you can't flash it, it's printed right there. But it's easier when there's a bunch of frames in your face and your brain is only processing what's important. And then a flash image of sin, a flash image of McDonald's, whatever. It kind of, over time, it conditions you. You know what? Maybe I am hungry. You know, there's a lot of people that think that they can't really have fun without drinking. I wonder why that is. You know, and this can go into a bunch of different topics with the cultural implications and how the CIA got involved with crack cocaine with the black communities. We can go on and on and on. These are verified things. But in terms of media, you can implement almost any message into anyone's mind if you're constantly showing it to them. And that's why I believe the enemy is using movies, music, and social media in general to kind of implement sin into people's lives. Because FOMO is a real thing. People don't want to miss out. They don't want to miss out on any of this.
Yeah, because it's like you said, they conflate it with fun.
Yeah.
And I mean, something that's interesting, I did my own research on this, I'll link some studies below, is when you consume something, right? For example, it could be a TV show. It could be something good, like when you go on a run. It could be a drug. It could be watching adult content on your phone. There is a dopamine spike that takes place in your brain. And the more that you indulge, right, the more that your brain is overstimulated with this dopamine, the harder it is to enjoy certain things, and the more you need to rely on whatever it is that is garnering that source of dopamine. And I think that, you know, apart from the enemy using technology, like you said, putting frames in the advertisements or in the movies, they use our own biology against us. They use our own brains against us. And that's one thing that the Bible talks about. It talks about be wary of your thoughts, because your thoughts shape your future. And based on my own experience and reading the Bible, it's kind of funny how the Bible tends to coincide with science, because what you're thinking about, right, tends to shape your thoughts. Meaning what? If you're constantly thinking about food, for example, right, because you see those images, like you said, in those commercials, well, there's a risk that you're going to fall into gluttony. If you're constantly thinking about women because this adult content has reframed the way that you look at women, well, you risk falling into lust. And so it's very important for all of us to identify that the enemy will attack you mentally. And they will attack you mentally to mess with you spiritually, right? Because wherever your mind is at, that's where the enemy is going to meet you. The same way God meets you where you are, the enemy does the exact same thing. And so I think you bring up very good points. And ultimately, I think, I told you this before, I think that in this generation, and maybe in the future generation, it only gets harder and harder and harder and harder not to fall into sin, because they use the technology to their advantage. They use social media, phones, which are very, very addictive. And so, I don't know. I think I'd ask you, like, if there was a way to, what do you think is the best way to be aware of when the enemy is using their tactics. Like, for example, in TV shows and stuff like that, how does somebody differentiate between, oh, I'm just having a good time, and, oh, this is actually harming me?
I mean, as a Christian, you would have to look at the fruits of what it's doing to you. If I know it says in the Bible that there's going to be a lot of false teachers, and you will know them by their fruit. If it coincides with what God says, that's a Christian. If it doesn't, but they know how to use their words really well, but their actions are literally displaying the exact opposite,
Amen.
then all right, probably isn't a real Christian. They probably have an agenda. They're just using religion as a front. And I think it's the same thing could be applied to inanimate objects. Non-sentient sin, like I said. Sentient is an enemy, living, breathing, sentient. Non-sentient in sin itself, just doesn't have a mind, it just is what it is. And non-sentient is an action. And if whatever you're doing, you can tell that what it's making you do, what it's making you feel, is not healthy. And how do you know this? Are you feeling anxious a lot when watching this? Are you feeling huge adrenaline spikes? Do you feel as if you're not really enjoying life if whatever this action or object is not in your life? Whether it be sex, whether it be drugs, whether it be a movie, TV show. And if it's consuming you to the entire point where it has a huge grip on your emotions and it could just make you feel differently like that, then chances are you're idolizing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good.
Yeah.
Like video games can be like that.
Yeah.
Sports can become like that. There's people who have gotten domestic abuse cases because they got upset over their team losing, and it spikes up around the Super Bowl, unfortunately, but that's the case. There's people who don't realize it, and they blame it, which is true, on the sin, and they blame it on themselves. But you also have to blame everything in the situation. It's you, the person, committing the act, right? Yes, it's the sin. Yes, it's almost as if it's programmed into these technology, but it's also the object itself. That's why you have to be really wary of that. It's so easy to get sucked up into a phone.
Yeah.
And when the phone's displaying all kinds of sin, you're going to reflect that. Jesus mentions...
Your eyes are the lamp of the body.
Yeah, Jesus mentions that careful on what you consume. And this is brought up multiple times throughout the Bible. Be careful what you consume. And I like to bring this up a lot with my family and friends because the word they use specifically is consume or think or do. It's not just food. Yes, food is a huge part of it, and I'm sure directly that's what it means. But we know a lot of things in the Bible are double entendres. It has multiple meanings. And how I took it is consumption is not just food. It's also what you allow yourself to listen to and see, which is why I was saying the enemy likes to use the media. If you're constantly listening to sin, you're conditioning yourself to be okay with listening to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time you hear someone saying something sinful, you're not going to correct them. You're not going to distance yourself because you're listening to music that says the same thing.
Spiritual food.
Yeah. So if you're feeding yourself, conditioning yourself, consuming this kind of content, you're kind of training your brain into thinking it's not that big of a deal. So when you hear someone say something absolutely crazy about kids, about a war, about sexual assault in prisons, about whatever it is, all these crazy things that actively happen every day, and someone says that it's not a big deal, because you're listening to this kind of content that says similar themes,
You're
right?
desensitized.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the way. You're desensitized to it. You're like, it's not that big of a deal. When in reality, it is that big of a deal. It is that big of a deal. It's that serious. It's always that serious.
Yeah. You, like we said, spiritual food. That's very important, and I think you're right. No, you are right. The Bible does talk a lot in double entendres. There's always multiple meanings to what it's saying, and what we watch is almost like a part of our spiritual food. It could be for better or it could be for worse. That's why I think it's very important when Jesus says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.
Yeah.
What are you consuming more? Are you consuming media where they're, you know, doing crazy stuff, where they're constantly
Gore.
having sex, gore, violence? Or are you in your word? Are you reading the word of God? Are you spiritually nourishing yourself that way? Because you know how they say you are what you eat?
Yeah.
I mean, in this sense, like
Literally.
you are what you eat spiritually. And I think something that you brought up a lot earlier, about having false teachers.
Yeah.
Notice how nowadays, you and I will probably both agree on this, the technology we have, phones, laptops, TVs, tablets, those become the actual guardians and parents of children nowadays.
Definitely.
Because when a parent doesn't want to deal with the kid, what do?
Hand up to the tablet or whatever.
Exactly. And it all connects back to what we're talking about in the media and the TV shows. What are they teaching your kids? What information are they putting in your kids' brains? Because if you want to condition someone, at what age would you start them at? Young as possible.
Yeah.
Young as possible.
Toddlers.
Exactly. And that's something that I think parents have to be aware about as well.
Definitely.
What do you think?
Yeah. I've read it, and I'll find the article. We can link it. Where I don't want to assume what grade, but either they were in middle school or in elementary, which is fairly young. And I know a lot of schools do like tablets for the students now because everything's integrated into technology.
The tablets.
They found that these kids had an AI app, and they generated AI, one of the classmates, and it was nudity. Their classmates are like either in the 5th or 4th grade. That is crazy. That's crazy. These kids probably just using AI just to be mean and bully someone, which on its own is not right, ended up making explicit AI generated photos of a classmate who's just as young. That's CP, man. That's not right. And obviously, when all of these technologies are so easily manipulable into something evil, like I just mentioned, you're conditioning these kids into thinking this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for us, we hear this because this kind of technology wasn't around when we were kids. You know, we had phones. Yes, it was getting worse at that time, but we couldn't AI generate nudity of somebody over one of our classmates.
Mm-hmm.
These kids can, and they've already done it. There's cases where teachers have found the students with this on their tablets, saw the image firsthand because they were walking around, or another student came up and was like, hey, this person generated so-and-so, you know, and it's happening a lot. That's crazy. And I don't want to hear anyone say, oh, but with every technology, there's downsides. This isn't a downside. You know, CP and stuff, that's not a downside. Oh, yeah, casualties, certain things are going to happen. That's not, no. We shouldn't have to settle for that. You know, you shouldn't have to settle, oh, but AI helps with data projections. Oh, but yeah, kids are going to make CP of each other. That's not okay. Why should we have to deal with that? It's not. This shouldn't be like, oh, casualties will happen. No. That's not what it is. I don't believe that's what it is. And, you know, I inherently, this is kind of straying off the topic, but I inherently don't trust huge corporations. I really don't. For example, a couple years ago, I would say 2022 to 2021, I looked into Facebook. I had to do a paper on it. They were being sued because people found out that the way that their system worked with how it promotes certain things were actually damaging young women's and young girls' mental health. And they found studies, you know, that directly linked it to suicides in women. And it was getting worse. And remember, Facebook is owned by Meta, right? Meta's the bigger parent company that owns Instagram. So when they were suing Facebook, people started to look into the other social media platforms that they owned. It wasn't just Facebook, it was Instagram too. This coding that Meta had was actively contributing to suicides. And now their whole defense, correlation doesn't mean causation. Which is why they messed themselves up, because they did a study, they did an internal investigation, and found out it was. Their own coders came out and said, oh yeah, we were told to keep quiet about it. You know the only reason they didn't say anything? It made them too much money. Way too much money. And they thought that, oh, well, it's a trade-off. Some girls kill themselves. Boo hoo. We make some money. That's like I'm saying with the kids generating images of each other. We shouldn't have a trade off. Why should there be a trade off in the begin with? And if we are gonna have a trade off, why does it have to be something so vulgar? Generating nudity of each other, or young girls committing suicide and generating depression. Why is that? Why did that have to be the trade off?
Yeah, and to me, I will say this. I think it's very clear that the enemy has an agenda.
Yeah.
And how do I identify the enemy? Well, a person being the same way a person can be used by God, right? Like we saw with the prophets and, people that receive messages or people that speak in tongues. The same can be said about the enemy, because what does the enemy do? They use people. They use their flesh. A part of human nature, not because it was based off original design, is that there is sin in our human nature. Now that it is a part of our human nature. And Satan will use people and they won't even know it. Because what the world normalizes to them is going to be just another regular day to them. And that involves greed with corporations. That involves lust with what they're putting out there and how they are conditioning young men and women to look at certain vulnerable groups. What do I mean by that? Well, you go on the website. I, for one, used to be an addict to pornography. You go on the website. Why is it that they're dressing these girls in school uniforms? Why is it that they're now integrating family taboo into their videos?
Yeah.
Right? And it's all disturbing, but it's real, right? It might sound like a joke. It might sound funny to some people, but it's not. It's not funny. This is happening.
Yeah.
And it's clear that aside from the individual people, which are the human beings, that there is a bigger agenda at play, because we keep seeing this pop up around the world with the new technologies, with all the CSAM that's starting to come up and pop up because of what? Artificial intelligence. Because of what? Now we have more phones and tablets, and we don't place any restrictions on them, or parents don't care to place restrictions on them because of ignorance or for whatever other reason. And so ultimately, I think it's clear that everything that the enemy tries to do is just a Walmart version of what God's already done. Because what Satan does is he corrupts what God's already created, because Satan can't create anything.
That's why he mimics.
Exactly.
They mimic a lot in terms of the psyche, what God teaches about how to have control of your own body, but to make it holy. You can take these teachings, but you also use it for bad. And we need to be aware of that. And that's why I've mentioned, whether it's a person or something non-sentient like an object, you look at the fruits of what it's producing. If it's consistently causing you to sin, it's not it. It's tough to admit that, but it's not it. Now, anything in moderation is healthy. Video games, sports, whatever it is that you do. But if it's getting to the point where it's actively drawing you from God, it's affecting your health, I don't believe Jesus or God wants you to do that. Like, why would they want you to actively diminish your health, mental health, spiritual health, just for these things that aren't going to come with you in the afterlife? I doubt that they would want that for you. So it's probably chances that they don't want that for you. I'm not saying God doesn't want you to be like, oh, get off your phone or get off your video game. Like, if you've worked hard, it's possible he'll allow you and would want you to, like, relax. It's like, hey, go watch that sport. Don't go crazy over it, but you can watch that. You can have fun. Go out with friends. You don't have to go out with friends and start drinking. Go out with your friends, grab something to eat, walk around, do something healthy and productive together. It doesn't have to be anything crazy where it's like, oh, we're going to go out drinking and get laid. Like, how is that helping you at all? There's a lot that could actually go wrong with that.
Exactly.
Especially if you're a woman, there's a lot can go wrong with, something like there's a lot of kidnappers, roofies, and drinks. If you're a guy, a lot of people are aggressive towards you when they're drunk. Like, it's a lot. There's way too many things that could go wrong. And very easily, too. It doesn't take that much. With any of these technologies as well, the same thing could be said. This AI, it didn't take long for people to start generating AI nudity of each other. It happened to Taylor Swift. It's happening to a lot of people. There's statistics, studies done on this. It's increased exponentially. And it's not like a slowly growing problem. Like I said, it's like it just out of nowhere, everyone started generating things with each other.
It's because society's over sexualized. There's a hypersexuality. There's a hyper emphasis on hypersexuality.
And it's bad. And recently, I don't know if it passed. I haven't kept tabs on it, but within the past year, within the big beautiful bill Trump wanted to pass, there was a law in there that stated that states could not have the legal authority to regulate AI. People noticed that, and they advocated for that to be taken out. That's another huge theme. With every year we talked about how the enemy operates. There's a sentient, then a non-sentient, which is the action itself. The whole free will is necessary, and it's all a conscious choice. And then with hell in the way in scripture is not the way movies portray it. Satan doesn't rule over it with a little pointy hat. Hell is separation from love. And obviously if you take love out of your life, you're gonna be hateful, depressed. So yeah, you're gonna suffer. And then ultimately, another part of all of this is the technology. So when you put it all together, it wraps up insanely accurately. Because when we talk about the technologies, I'm sorry, I got distracted. This dude just walked up and took a picture. You saw that, right? Yeah, I do those.
Well, what goes against God, like in the most ultimate form, right?
Listen, I low-key forgot what I was gonna say.
Well, you were talking about technology, and what goes against God in like the most ultimate form. I would place all my bets on artificial intelligence, because the same way God creates us in his image, right? We're creating artificial intelligence in our image, except these are synthetic robots operating on all this data and all these databases. And ultimately, I think that at a certain point, we're going to have such a necessity, or these people, right? People in politics are going to project such a necessity, or people in corporations are going to project such a necessity for this kind of technology in order to advance, that it's almost like we're going to start idolizing this technology. And I'm not saying that because anything can turn into an idol, but I'm saying that because at a certain point, right, once we use technology, there comes a certain point where, it becomes the norm. And we rely on it, and I'm afraid that's going to happen.
It's already happening, actually. Wrote a paper on it in college. IQ levels are going down. Our generation, those who are older, are using it to sustain and help retain information. That's not bad. It's the younger generation that's really relying on it, and it's affecting them a lot, especially since COVID really took a lot of years of their crucial learning. When you're older, you only learn about the more advanced topics. You can always come back to that a year later because you already have the fundamentals down. You already have the critical thinking down. At a young age, when you don't have any of that, and then you're already relying on AI, you can't build anything up at all. And what I wanted to backtrack, I got distracted earlier, but you were saying how they were going to misuse that 48-hour period. And because the company is basically like, I don't really want any trouble with the government, I'm going to just take this down.
Mm-hmm.
They could flag political statements down and start censoring people.
That's what
so it's like a fog screen,
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I'm saying that sometimes you have to look at the fruit of what it is, even if it's not a physical, because technically a corporation is an entity. It's not a sentient individual, so you have to look if what it's being used for is holy, if it's Christian-like. That's not Christian-like. It's a facade. It's a front. And I was going to piggyback on that. A lot of other corporations are doing the same. Throughout many years, right, people have complained about how grooming and predatory actions have been happening on the internet, especially on massive platforms. We know we can't monitor the whole internet. It's impossible. We don't have the manpower to do it. And if we could scourge the whole internet, we don't have the physical human beings to go out and every single one of these predators and catch them.
Could restrict it, though.
We could restrict it. Why is it all of a sudden corporations do care now? Discord wants to implement,
ID verification.
They want to have all these things, and they're going under the guise of we want to protect the kids.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a concern for years. Why are you now doing it? I don't like Instagram, honestly. I have it. I don't trust it. I may delete it. What happens is that they have an AI chatbot that summarizes your text. To summarize something, you would have to what? To read it.
Exactly. You'd have to know what's there.
Yeah, if I gave you nothing and I told you Abel summarized that, you're gonna be
of
like,
course I'm not gonna know.
yeah, you're gonna be like, what do you want me to summarize? There's nothing there. I would have to give you something to read. You're
Exactly.
reading everything.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was researching on the topic of AI has been exponentially failing in a lot of areas. It's debated, really, but people have said it's failing in content generation. That technically, with how it works, it's not really generating something new. It's taking pixels that it already knows and basically rescrambles it to look like it's something new. Now, to the human perspective, it looks new, but on paper, it's not. It's just rejumbling a bunch of images. Technically, you're going to run out at some point, right? If you have a set amount of data and you rescramble it, at some point, you will run out of things. It's going to take a long time. Granted, it will take a very long time, but at some point, it will. So you have to constantly feed it. So technically, it's not sentient like a human. A human, we can generate new ideas naturally. Some very unique, some slightly similar. But it's our own thoughts. No one has to feed pictures physically into our brain. That's not how it works. The only thing it is succeeding in, right, in the research I've done, is surveillance, which is scary. Out of everything, right, I'm not saying it's horrible and it's useless in other areas.
It's data collection.
It's actually doing very, very good job. That's the one thing. It's like S tier. Nothing can beat it.
That's what a lot of people are concerned about.
So why is it that they're putting AI in a lot of the social medias to constantly scan and read what you're researching, searching up, and texting?
Yeah.
You know, at this point, we're kind of straying into like what ifs. But as concrete as it is, what we do know is AI is S tier in terms of surveillance and data collection and analysis. No one else can beat it. No other program can beat it. No other technology can beat it. It's like B or C tier in other generation and other uses, but in terms of data and everything and analysis, literally the best. Every company agrees. That's what they're investing in. What's also a fact is that a lot of companies are trying to implement it into their apps. Chase has a chat bot. I'm not entirely sure if it's AI. Amazon has one, Rufus. Discord has been in the talks of having one, which is not a good look because they're using, we're trying to protect the kids when we'd advocated this for years.
Right. I think that's the thing. They all put it under a guise.
A front.
Which is, hey, we're doing what everybody else is doing and we're partaking in innovation, so we're implementing AI. Okay, cool. But then there's that extra layer that people don't know about, your data. Your data is, it's already out there.
Yeah.
Right? It's already out there.
It just makes it
easier.
And
with AI, it only makes it easier.
It's very concerning because boss also doing the research paper. Sam Altman is the guy that was in charge of OpenAI, ChatGPT. He was actually let go, and they didn't want to reveal the reason as to why. They just said that, but there have been workers there that have said that he was very aggressive. Now, I don't know in what way. That was the word that you described him. He was, and I quote, aggressive for the innovation and push of AI. And he was let go for mysterious reasons, but it's speculated because of those workers that came forward saying, like, oh, yeah, he wanted to innovate AI, like, now. He always wanted us to make it stronger. Like, not yesterday, not tomorrow. Like, we should have been had it ready. U.S. government told him to stop. Slow down on this. We need to make laws for this upcoming, technology. He said no. He said, do you have any grounds for any of this? And they're like, no, but we're asking you formally. Like, we need to work together. He said no. It's very obvious people who are pushing AI, ethical issues, don't even register to them. They don't care. And they never will. We see this through pattern recognition. Whenever this technology and a lot of other corporations are involved with money and power, when someone tells them, you need to slow down, we need to see the effects of this, they push past it. And now where are we in society? Kids generating these photos of each other, people generating it to make explicit content, It's being used to survey people. Honestly, that's really what it is. Data collection. Um, you don't trust a random stranger with your phone, but you're trusting these corporations with your data, which has more than just what your phone has. There's all the track records. Just because you press delete doesn't mean it's gone.
Yeah, and what I brought up earlier about AI, eventually us having an over reliance on AI, that's not something that I invented. That is actually how do I say, a risk. That is a real risk, something that we shouldn't want to happen. And I did a paper about this in college. AI at a certain point is going to start automating jobs, low level jobs. But at a certain point, it's also going to put into risk mid level jobs, especially jobs that have to do with security, jobs that have to do with data. And so at a certain point, once AI starts to advance more and more and more and more and more, well, we have to question when is enough? When is enough? That's what I genuinely think. And examples that you brought up about CSAM and how it's affecting children and how they have our data, I think that's all furthering the agenda of the enemy. First, they started with iPads. First, they started with phones. First, they started with all these new technologies. Why wouldn't they do this with AI? And I think that's something that we should all think about. Unfortunately, we're all out of time today, so I'm going to wrap things up. I thank you guys for listening to this episode. We're going to put links below about what we're talking about, specific studies and things like that go into AI, that go into what these corporations are doing. And ultimately, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one. I'm Abel, and I encourage you to always think like Christ. And Dervin, if you have anything to say to the people.
Keep your wits about you, and God bless.